Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for the first program in our job search prep camp for PhDs in the humanities and social sciences. So the workshop today is on exploring careers for PhDs. And my name is Helen Fogg, one of the associate directors at Penn Career Services, and I am joined by my colleague, Marianne Lippa. Marianne, would you like to say a brief hello?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to see everybody here this morning, and thanks for joining us.
Great. Thanks, Marianne. So we're going to get the program started. So I'm going to go over our topics for today. So we're going to first talk about just beginning to explore careers outside of academia. After that, we're going to talk a little bit about the transferable skills that employers are looking for, that all of you have as PhD students. Then I'll turn things over to Marianne to talk about the 4 stages of the career exploration process. In the process, we will also be discussing some of the top online resources for PhD students. And then after that, we're going to end with a slide on just how to make the best use of our PhD job search prep camp for all of you. So we'll end it there. So just a couple of quick logistics before we get started onto the content. If you have questions, please feel free to put that into the chat. We'll be monitoring that throughout the session. We really want you to engage with us in the chat, and we want to hear from you. So even though this is an online, it's a Zoom presentation, we really do want to try to recreate as much of that interaction as possible that we normally would have if this was in person. Just to let everyone know, this program will be recorded, and the recording will be posted for future viewing on the Career Services YouTube page, and we will be sure to let everyone know once that is up later this month for viewing. Another thing that I will mention is that this is an ongoing process of career exploration. So we'll start having that conversation and discussion today, but not all of the questions will be answered today. And I know that some of you might be interested in talking about specific careers. We're not quite doing that today since there are just so many careers out there that PhDs enter. And so, we want to save a lot of those more individual conversations about specific career paths and specific jobs for individual appointments. So we want to encourage everyone to make an appointment with a career services advisor in an appointment so that we can talk with you one-on-one about those plans and about your ideas. So before we get started as well, it's really nice for us to get a chance to know you. So one of the questions that we had today is, what brings you here to this workshop? So I really would love to hear in terms of kind of what you're hoping to learn from this workshop, what would be helpful to you, what some of your concerns and aspirations are. Please put that into the chat. I'll be monitoring that, as will my colleague Marianne. So please feel free to put some of that information in the chat. There's no wrong answers. We would really love to hear from you. So any comments about and where you're at right now, where you want to go, what you hope to gain from this prep camp and from this session in particular would be really helpful. So I'm going to keep an eye on the chat in the next couple of minutes. So as you kind of take some time to put a few things into the chat, I'm going to go over just a little bit about who we are at Penn Career Services, and also who do we serve on campus. So for those of you who might not be familiar with, with our office, Career Services is a centralized office on campus, and we serve the vast majority of students at Penn. And the team that I'm on and that Marianne is on is a team that works specifically with graduate students and postdocs. So we're incredibly excited to work with you all and to have you all join us today. So just a little bit more in terms of who we are as a team. So this is the grad student and postdoc team. It's led by my colleague, Joseph Barber, myself, Helen Fogg, Diane Hall, Marianne Lippa, and Kate Lawrence. We are the 5 people on the graduate student and postdoc team. So that in a nutshell is who we are. And so I'm going to go back to the slide that I had earlier in terms of learning a little bit more about what you all hope to gain from today. So I see a couple of comments in the chat. Thank you very much for putting that there. So one other thing that I'll mention before we get to what's in the chat is just a couple of things to for all of you to know in terms of how to take advantage of our services at Career Services, especially if you haven't worked with us before. The first is to activate your Handshake account. So Handshake is the platform that we use at Career Services to communicate with our students. It's the platform where all of the jobs and internship listings for Penn students are hosted. It's a way for you to learn about employers, for you to connect with other students on campus. It's where you can find out more about the programs and workshops that we host from the grad student and postdoc team here. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop for everyone, and everyone has a Handshake account. So please do activate that. And if I can have Marianne or my colleague Kate to put the link into the chat for Handshake, that would be terrific. The other thing I would recommend is for everyone to go onto our website. So again, if Kate, if you don't mind putting our Career Services website into the chat, that would be terrific. So log on to our Career Services website, and you can log in to that website and select your preferences, where you can basically get tailored, customized newsletters every week based on your career interest, your industry interest, where you are in the program, things like that. So it's how you can hear from us on a weekly basis. Definitely encourage all of you to make an appointment with a career advisor and to check out some of our events and programs throughout the year. So, all right. So I'm going to go back to that slide earlier just to hear a little bit from people. So there's a lot in the chat. So I'm going to read a couple of these out loud. So one person said, I don't have much, if any, work experience outside of academia, and I'm aware that employers stigmatize PhDs for not having real work experience. I'm interested in doing some part-time remote work, paid ideally, to get those lines on a resume. Someone else says, I'm going into my last year of my PhD. I'm thinking about the job market and what the options are for post-PhDs, especially for non-academic jobs. That's terrific. You're in the right place. So we also have another comment. I'm at least a couple of years from graduation, so I'm just starting to think a little bit more seriously about what I might do after this program, especially in terms of alternative careers. So great, wonderful. Let's see. Someone else says, I'm curious to learn about non-academic career options. The job market in academia is tough, so it's hard to tell if I'll end up in academia or not. Yeah, that's something that we hear a lot from people because, especially over the last year and happening before the pandemic, the job market for faculty positions has always been tough, right? And in some ways, it's become a little bit tougher with the pandemic over the last year. Let's see. So more people are here to learn about what the possibilities out there are. Let's see. And okay, yeah. So more echoing in terms of learning how to narrow down career paths. So these are all really wonderful comments. Thank you all so much for sharing them with us today. So for some of you, I know that this might be the first time that you are beginning to think about other careers. And for some of you, it might be something that you're thinking about because of the faculty job market and how hard it has been there. Some of you might be thinking about other careers because you want to think about other careers, and you're just kind of curious about what's out there. And I wanted to kind of take a moment to kind of acknowledge that taking the step to think about careers can be hard. It can be hard, especially to disentangle your identity from your research, which is what you've been focused on for many years, particularly for those of you who are, a year or two from graduation. Your dissertation is kind of taking a lot of your energy. It's kind of one of the main focuses in your life right now, and so it can be hard to kind of move away from just solely focusing on that dissertation to thinking a little bit more broadly about careers and jobs. And sometimes one of the comments that we get from from working with PhDs is that so much of your identity is focused on the work that you do and the research that you do, that it can be hard to kind of go beyond that, to think about what else can you do outside of research or outside of researching this very narrow topic that you've been really invested in. And so what we want to do today is to help you all kind of think beyond the dissertation. And one of the things that I like to say to graduate students is that you are more than your dissertation. So I know that so many of you are spending a lot. It's a multi-year process, right? It's a multi-year project that you're working on. But we want to encourage you to think about all of the skills that go into your dissertation, right? So it's not just the research itself, but it's what are the things that you have done to put together your dissertation? What are the things that you manage, right? What are the things that you have to keep track of? What are the things that you have to write and think critically about to put together this huge project that is making a scholarly contribution? So I want to kind of focus some of our discussion today on the very valuable transferable skills that all of you have, that lots of employers, outside of academia want, and that they will pay you for. So hearing from people who are PhDs who have moved to careers and jobs outside of academia, here are some of the things that we see, that we hear often. One thing that people say is that they are doing work that is intellectually challenging, that's engaging, that they're passionate about. Other people would say that they're able to find work that allows them to have the work-life balance that they envision and the kind of flexibility that they want. Others talk about how they can really prioritize geographic preferences and other forms of stability. So this is a comment that we typically hear from people who might be in a two-body situation, for example, where they get to have more choices in terms of where they have jobs. We also hear from PhDs in careers outside of academia that they are getting compensated, they're getting paid and recognized for their work and contributions, that they work with really great colleagues, teammates, clients, and that they're also finding ways to grow professionally in their own career path. So whether that means being promoted, whether that means having a slightly nonlinear career path where they get to kind of do more of what it is that they enjoy doing. So these are some of the things that we often hear. So this is just to give you all an idea of kind of what's on the other side of the PhD for people who have looked at and are in careers outside of academia. So kind of connecting these, what I would call, some of the qualities, some of the benefits of, looking at these roles is kind of making that connection between what you're hoping to gain and also what employers are looking for. So in thinking about employers outside of academia, a couple of things to focus on. So one is that it's less so that employers are looking for specific degrees. Although, some employers, depending on the field, depending on the organization, they might ask for, let's say, a master's degree in X, or they might have specifications for what levels of degrees they might want. For the most part, employers are more interested in hearing about the skills, right, that that are needed to do the job and to fulfill the responsibilities. And in fact, I would say that for the most part, if you're looking at, job ads, for example, there are going to be very few positions that would explicitly ask for, let's say, a PhD in the humanities, or a PhD in the social sciences, although some positions might. But it's really more so about, here are the skills that we want in an ideal candidate, right? The other thing that employers always look for is just a genuine interest in the work of the organization, and in the industry. Like, they want to know that, you're actually considering this, and you're actually interested in doing this type of work. And that, you don't just simply need a job, even though that might be the case as well. The other thing that employers want is that they want someone who's collegial, someone who, would be great for them to work with, someone who would be great to have on their team, someone who, will be easy to get along with, will be able to kind of contribute to a positive and collegial environment in the office or beyond. If it's kind of like a hybrid situation. So these are some of the things that employers are looking for. So what we want to kind of talk about today is a little bit of that kind of Venn diagram between, what you're looking for, right, as a PhD in the humanities and social sciences, and what employers are looking at, right, and looking for. So it's kind of that middle part of what you have in common that bridges the interests, right, of both you and employers. So I want to take some time to talk a little bit more about the transferable skills that all of you have that are incredibly valuable, and that employers are looking for. So I have on this slide, that 7 or so transferable skills that all of you have. So even just by looking at this slide, I hope that many of you will begin to see, like, okay, communication, writing and speaking for different audiences, teamwork and collaboration. I hope that you can begin to kind of recognize that you do have some of these skills, even though, it might not be something that you're thinking about on, let's say, like a daily basis or even on a regular basis. So in looking at a variety of jobs, and it's certainly something that me and my colleagues on the grad student and postdoc team have done a lot of in working with students, is that we're constantly looking at jobs that PhDs in the humanities and social sciences apply to. These are a lot of the skills that are always appearing on job ads. Communications, being able to talk to people, to talk to different audiences, teamwork and collaboration, being able to work with people. For any organization that you're applying to, you're going to work with other people, right? Whether it's on one team, on multiple teams, in a larger office, in a bigger division, it's always going to involve working with other people. Analytical problem solving, analytical, critical thinking skills. These are all skills that are very much valued, because any employer that's looking to hire someone is hiring them to basically solve a problem, right? Here's something that needs to get done, and we need someone to solve the problem. So those are things that you're cultivating, that you're developing, especially in your dissertation work. Project management and organizational skills, those are huge, and they appear in so many different jobs across a range of industries. Interpersonal skills is being able to relate to people, to talk to people, work with people, being able to synthesize large amounts of information, especially in our world right now where there's just so much information. How do you kind of distill and synthesize lots of information to understand, like, what's the most important thing to know? And then finally, being able to work independently, right? Even though the teamwork and collaboration is really important, being able to do your own work and to meet deadlines, to basically be responsible for certain projects, certain roles, certain responsibilities. That's always going to be a key part of any position. So I've talked a little bit about them broadly, but I want to kind of more explicitly connect that to what you all are doing as graduate students. So communication, writing a dissertation definitely is showing that you have communication skills. Writing for different audiences, whether it's writing an article. Some of you might be writing a blog post, for example, about your research. presenting at conferences and workshops and seminars. These are all examples of communicating verbally. Many of you are also teaching assistants, right? So you're leading discussion section, you're in a class of 15, 12, 15, 20 people, and communicating with them on a regular basis. So these are all examples of how you can relate to people and communicate and get things across and convey information to them. Teamwork and collaboration. So kind of going back to the TAing example, some of you might be TAing in a large class, right, with other graduate students. So you're working with the other TAs, you're working with your professor to, to collaborate and to be on the same page, right, as it relates to, running a course and, having everyone kind of be able to carry out the same thing, so that all of the sections, for example, are getting the same information and are equal in terms of how the grading process works. Others of you might be collaborating with graduate researchers where you're actively working with other people to to conduct research. You might be putting together a conference. You might be peer reviewing other people's work. These are all examples of working with other people and collaborating. Analytical, critical thinking, and problem solving skills. I mentioned this earlier, but devising a dissertation project and making original contributions to the field, this is kind of the epitome of being able to, to think critically and to problem solve, because all of you are answering important questions, right, in your dissertation. Project management and organization skills, especially for those of you who are at the dissertation stage, that what goes into a dissertation, right? From the sources to the writing to, the footnotes. There's a lot involved in this big multi-year project. So that's definitely an example of managing a project. Interpersonal skills, those are things that you're all kind of developing as well in graduate school. You're navigating relationships with your advisor, your dissertation committee. If you're publishing something, you're working with an editor, you're working with students, you're working with mentors. So they're all examples of kind of relating to people in different ways. And then synthesizing large amounts of information. I think that's what all of you are doing, right? Because you're looking at primary, secondary sources, performing literature reviews. All of that takes a lot of kind of intellectual, ability, right, to be able to distill information. And then finally, working independently. Your dissertation, for many of you, like it's all on your own, right? You're directing, you're researching, and you're writing your own dissertation. So I hope that some of this information can help you kind of begin to see the connections between what you're doing as a graduate student and also the skills that employers very much value and look for eagerly in job candidates. So a couple of things that I want to mention before I turn things over to my colleague, Marianne. So in thinking about the career exploration process, a lot of people that we work with, sometimes are kind of afraid of thinking about like, well, I don't know what, what my long-term career plans are. And that can be really daunting. But what we want to really kind of emphasize today is that, prioritizing that short-term goal of finding your next job or your first job after your PhD is normal, and that is a more kind of manageable task, right? You don't need to figure out what you're going to do for the rest of your life, but we want to help you be able to identify what it is that you want to do immediately after that PhD. So that's related to the second point on this slide, which is that your first job out of a PhD program is not the job that you'll stay in forever. In fact, research shows that within 1 to 3 years, it's when most PhDs end up transitioning to another role, right? Another role that is a better fit. Career paths are non-linear. So this is something that, especially in our next event of the PhD prep camp, you'll hear from some alums encourage students that career paths are not linear. You know, the more that you talk to PhDs who are in careers outside of academia, the more that you'll begin to see that, you know, there's never a straight line that goes from one thing to the next. It's always, you know, going on to one thing that then leads you to another. So landing a job that you want is usually the result of your own efforts, but also some luck. So, you know, a lot of what we'll be talking about today and throughout the prep camp is to help you kind of get the agency to know what to do for each stage of the career exploration process. But there's also some luck involved, right? In terms of who you talked to, you know, who might be able to introduce you to someone else who then connects you to this other job opportunity. It might be kind of being at the right place, being at the right time. So there's a combination of, you know, your own efforts as well as some luck involved in where you end up, right, in terms of your next job. And so kind of relating to this last point on the slide is, even though your future long-term career is going to be hard to predict, we want you to be familiar with the career exploration process so that you can have the agency to kind of know what to do, right? Even if things might be uncertain, if you know, even when you can't kind of know exactly what it is that you will do, let's say 10 years from now, and that is all perfectly okay. So I'm going to stop for a moment and see if there are any questions in the chat. And I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Marianne, in a couple of seconds, but I'll wait for maybe another 5 more seconds to see if there are other questions that people have. In the meantime, so even if you are not able to put in a question right now, we're always going to be stopping for questions throughout the session. So please feel free to put in the chat, and you know, we'll be sure to address it later. So I don't see anything in the chat right now, so I'm going to turn things over to Marianne. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Marianne can share hers.
Great, thanks, Helen. All right, I'm going to hopefully start sharing mine. If it doesn't come up, please let me know. Okay, is it on your screen now?
You're good.
Okay, fantastic, great. All right, thanks Helen. So now we're going to talk about what we consider to be 4 key stages to the career exploration process. These include some action steps that we're going to discuss. I'm going to also share with you some resources that will help guide you along this process. The first stage of the exploration is thinking about and reflecting on what are the different options out there, right? So what are some of the alternative paths that, you know, I might want to be considering or I might be interested in? The second thing is talking to individuals that are working in specific areas of, you know, different career interests and fields that might be of interest to you, or you might want to just gather additional information, share information about yourself. This is a really key part. Networking is a key part of the exploration process. The third area we're going to talk about is how do you actually professionalize some of your skills, right? How do you actually gain and acquire experience that is going to be helpful for you as you go through the career exploration and also as you get ready to apply for internships and full-time positions. Taking action and making decisions is the final step of the process, and this is where we're going to talk about what are some of the concrete areas where you might need to, you know, start getting your application materials ready, prepare for interviews, perhaps once you receive a job offer, you know, discuss what are some of the negotiating aspects. So that's really kind of the continuum of the exploration process. So in reflecting and exploring your options, networking and gathering information, and professionalizing and gaining experience, we have specifically 3 links on our website. So Helen or Kate, if one of you wouldn't mind sharing those in the chat box, that would be great, where we go into more depth and detail about each of these areas. So as I was mentioning, the first part of this career exploration process is to have time to reflect, to evaluate, to explore all the different things that are out there that you may have heard of already or you may not have heard of yet. And so it's going to be important to really kind of understand how do your skills, how do your competencies, how do your interests, your values, what's important to you as you start to think and consider possible career options. What will be challenging for you, intellectually stimulating for you? What will you find to be meaningful? This is going to be a really key part of the exploration process for you, because this helps kind of set the stage for what comes as steps 2, 3, and 4. So the second area is thinking about networking and how do you learn information about these different areas of interest? How do you build relationships, talk to people? So networking is really an opportunity for you to meet individuals, whether that takes place in person, post-pandemic, or to simply set up a time to speak with them on Zoom or the telephone. And you start to build a rapport and a relationship and a connection that enables you to kind of, maybe circle back with them at certain points in your application process, in your exploration process. You'll be able to ask them questions about what it's like to work in that particular position that they have. How did they end up going into that field, right, or industry? And so it's not just gathering information, but it's also an opportunity for you to share information about yourself. So it's a nice dialogue and conversation that you can have with them. We refer to those conversations as informational interviews, but I also like to think of it as not just an interview, but also a discussion, right? And I think that's really important to remember that it's a two-way discussion that you have with alumni and other individuals that are in that particular field of interest. The third area that we're going to talk about is how do you actually kind of take those skill sets that you've acquired as a PhD student or postdoc and kind of move that along to professionalizing that skill set, right? So how do you gain experience? How do you transfer those skills? And so you're going to have, chances to hopefully demonstrate that, to hopefully practice those skills and, kind of incorporate that into your job search. So the first area, reflecting and exploring options. I think it's really important to remember that this is something that you can do at any point of your PhD program. It is not something that you need to do, towards the tail end. It's something that you can do even in your first couple years. I think that the sooner you start to explore, I think it really gives you that information, that knowledge, and it allows you to really have, kind of more time to reflect and to really think about things. So keep in mind that you can start this now. It's never too early. Equally important to remember is that this is something that, might not really ever be finished. It's something that's going to be kind of cyclical, right? It's a process that's going to continue to be something that you can do. It's not something that necessarily has a definitive endpoint. Certainly, when you get ready to apply for jobs, this is something that's still going to be taking place. Even once you are working, maybe as you think about your next step or next position, this is something that you might start to reflect again on. So that's why we say that it may never be finished, because it really is it's a cyclical process throughout. During this stage, I think it's really important to think about what is important to you. What do you feel are your values when it comes to finding something to pursue in terms of a career? Where do your interests and skill sets lie? Where do they intersect? Where do they overlap? This is really what's an important part of this process, is understanding that it's not so much just finding, oh, this job looks interesting, but it's more, how does this connect with my values, with what's important to me? How does this relate to the skill set that I have acquired as a PhD student? All of that is going to be taken into account. Specifically, we have 4 tools that are really useful for students to explore these different areas. These 4 platforms are really a great tangible way to start this exploration process, to learn information, to see how do I connect skill sets and interests and competencies and values in a way that's meaningful. So if Helen or Kate could put in these links, that would be great. So we're going to talk about ImaginePhD. ImaginePhD is designed for humanities and social science students to allow you to reflect and to, it has assessments, it has resources, there's a blog on ImaginePhD, and these are going to be, I think these assessments are going to be helpful for you as you start to think about what are some possible careers that might be of interest. The second one that's also equally, I think, useful for students is VersatilePhDs. Specifically, there's a section on there called the PhD Career Finder. And this is a website that, it basically showcases students who have gone through the process of applying for non-faculty positions. And it gives advice and perspectives that I think are really useful, as I have conversations with students in that exploration phase. They go onto the website, they see what are some of the different opportunities, what are the different options and things that just they may not have thought of. And then how do you kind of go through that process? And you hear about people's testimonials and their firsthand experience doing that. The third platform that we're really excited is now available to Penn students is called Aurora. So this is our newest resource that we have for career exploration. And I'm going to talk about that in a couple slides. And then Carnegie Careers. Carnegie Careers is a weekly column that focuses specifically just for PhD students and postdocs. There's various topics that are of discussion. There are blog posts, additional articles. So we will get to that as well in the forthcoming slides. Okay, so as I have mentioned, it's really important to think about what are your skills, what are the competencies that you see yourself having as a PhD student. So one of the ways to kind of make this a little bit more tangible and a little bit more concrete is to kind of have some, I like to say, kind of action items on your to-do list, right? So think about, carving out a certain amount of time each week towards this reflection process, right? So think about making a list of what you do during your day, that particular week and month. And as you start to see what you've written down on that list, it'll make a lot of sense in terms of, okay, what are some of the things that I've focused on, right? What are some of the things that I have done either in my research or what have I done kind of, have I had a presentation? Have I worked on, a publication? All of that is going to be something that is going to be important to see kind of in that list so that you, one, are able to kind of remember everything that you've done, and it's not 6 months earlier that you're trying to reflect on, but it's more kind of doing it as you go along. I would recommend doing this for several weeks because, as you know, there are different responsibilities that you have, and some things might really start happening in that third or fourth month, after you've done kind of that initial action items of your list. You'll start to see and draw connections in terms of what are some of the skills that you're using more often, what are some of the skills that maybe you're using a little bit, less frequently, and that's going to be important for you as you start to reflect on these different areas. I think it's also important to give yourself time to, kind of take a shift from, kind of that PhD student mode to thinking about, okay, well, if I'm a professional, if I'm now working in that internship or that full-time position, what are some of the skills that I'm going to be focused on? What are some of the skills that I'm going to be required to utilize? Or what are the skills that I'm going to be expected to use? And so I think if you start to kind of put that hat on, if you will, like that'll help you start to kind of see where are some of these transferable skills, intersecting with my different responsibilities. I think it's really important to also think about skills and competencies, keeping that organized. There are going to be some that maybe you're just not as keen on and excited about, and that's okay. And so maybe you just put either cross it out or you put a little notation next to it for the ones that you do want to make sure that you're continuing and focused on, the ones that you really do enjoy. Kind of maybe putting an asterisk or circling those, whatever your method would be for the organizational part. That I think is going to be a good way to kind of help keep things organized for you and allow you to go back and refer to that list and understand more fully what the kind of the next step might be and kind of that bigger picture. So let's say that, you've kind of thought about what are some of the things that you really enjoy, what are some of the professional interests you have, what are some of your personal interests, right? Well, I think it's good to think about not just your professional interests, but also your personal interests, right? And remembering that the two are not mutually exclusive. So maybe, when you were a teaching assistant, you really found that you love to teach, you really enjoy that particular aspect. Well, what are some ways that you might be able to kind of pivot that teaching, interest that you had in the classroom to something that, you have in a professional setting, right? So some of those areas might include, opportunities for public speaking, right? So thinking about ways that you might be able to do maybe outreach programs or giving a presentation, speaking to, more than, just a small group, all of that is going to be, I think, something that you can, take into account. Perhaps, facilitating discussion is where you see yourself kind of shifting that, the teaching and instructional skill set too. Organizational skills go hand in hand with teaching. And so you might think about ways that you're going to be able to utilize your interest for organization. And lastly, mentorship opportunities, right? So thinking about, mentoring others, right? When have you been able to maybe do that? And if you haven't necessarily had an opportunity, think about, looking for ways that you can mentor, and, really help people achieve their goals and kind of cultivate that skill set. Some students, also think about, okay, well, outside of work, what would you also enjoy? And perhaps that's, volunteering. That also gives you an opportunity to explore, ways that you can connect, not just with, the community, but other avenues that really are allowing you to showcase and demonstrate that particular skill, interest, and value. So this is just to kind of show you, how the competencies are really kind of that next step to the skills, right? So you want to think about thinking about how, it's not just the skill set, but it's also kind of the behavior characteristics that really kind of come about from, utilizing particular skills, thinking about, okay, well, if I really enjoy communication skills, right? Like the strength or the skill that you have allows you to demonstrate it in these particular ways, right? So you're able to articulate your thought and idea clearly and effectively to exchange information. So you also want to think about, how does that maybe overlap with digital literacy, right? Or, technical aptitude, teamwork and collaboration, right? Teamwork and collaboration is a category of competencies that you're going to see very frequently for a lot of different roles and opportunities and positions. And the reason for that is because it really kind of intersects with, communication skills, for example. It intersects with working with others, building those relationships. And so I think this particular, graphic really kind of demonstrates how things are not mutually exclusive, but that there's a lot of overlap with the competencies and skills that you have. So earlier I mentioned that one of the platforms that we have available to PhD students is ImaginePhD. And so specifically, this has been, created for PhD students in the humanities and social sciences. It has, various assessments. There are assessments that are going to ask you questions that, relate to your skills, your interests, your values. You have resources on here as well. You also have there's blog posts that relate to career exploration and how to kind of have that reflection and evaluation of what it is that's important to you as you keep this in mind as you go along with your job search process. So as I mentioned, one of the assessments, is really trying to gather information on what you're interested in, what you've done, maybe what you've not done as often, what you have not done, what you can do, and what you can do really well. And it kind of shows you maybe the different ways, the different areas of, these particular categories and columns. And I think that, whenever I've had feedback from students, they found this assessment on ImaginePhD to be really useful to allow them to kind of have it in a very kind of visual way of, assessing what their strengths, what their values are, what their skill sets are. So VersatilePhD is another platform that we recommend to students as part of their exploration process. You're able to, there's a PhD career finder. And sorry, Kate or Helen, do you mind putting the links for these in the chat as we go along? So the VersatilePhD platform is really useful because it not only allows you to have kind of the exploration process, it allows you to read through the experiences that students have had going through the job application process, through the job exploration process as well. And it really gives you kind of ways to think about your skill set, ways to think about how to transfer those skills, and ways to really convey those skills. And how do you express those skills in a way that makes sense from kind of, understanding, like the research skills, right? Well, how does that translate into the professional setting, right? So it's the critical thinking, it's the analytical skills, it's the communication skills, all of that. And I think it's really helpful to kind of read through some of these materials that students have uploaded about their experiences going through the non-faculty search. So Carnegie Careers is another resource that is useful for students as they go through this process. It's on various topics. So you'll just see that in this screenshot, for example, some of the topics that are discussed and written about include, when you get to the stage of salary negotiations, thinking about, different ways, like what happens with the job application, right? So after you hit that submit button, what happens on kind of the other end, with the employer? What are they now doing once they've seen your application? And so that, I think, really helps make things a little bit more tangible for students to read about. You can also see that there's, various data reports on Carnegie Careers. There's for Inside Higher Ed, you can also go to the reports and data, but Carnegie Careers really enables you to kind of see these posts that are written by experts in these different areas. And I think that that's really going to be useful for you as you go through that exploration stage. So then Aurora, as I mentioned, is our newest platform and resource that we have available. And it has, I think it's really going to be it's very useful for students who are, not thinking about the faculty route. They're thinking about careers outside of the professoriate. You're thinking about maybe something in nonprofit, maybe something still in a college or university setting within higher education, but just not a faculty role. And these interviews are, I think, they're very candid. I think they're also very useful as you start to hear about these PhD students who have been successful at making that transition from PhD student to a professional role, whatever industry they've chosen to go into. They will talk about that experience. They will talk about kind of what they did to best situate themselves to go into that particular field, to then, go into that particular position. And I think that, hearing those experiences firsthand is incredibly beneficial. So we encourage you to definitely check out Aurora. Okay, so the next part of the exploration process is thinking about having conversations where you will be able to gather information about that particular individual's professional background, as well as, what they're currently doing and what it's like to work in that particular industry, field. And we call this networking, right? So the reason it's called networking is you're gathering information from the individual you're speaking with, and then you're also sharing information about yourself. So you might be thinking, well, why is this an important part of the exploration process? And I think it's important because it really enables you to, gain that information, that insight, that perspective that you've now kind of already developed and, you've kind of reflected on in terms of your interests, skill set, and values. So now you're taking it to kind of the next level, right? So the next level is having these conversations to really enable you to have that kind of opportunity to think about, is this something that still is of interest to me? Is this something that maybe I need to work on a particular skill that might be, very beneficial to have in this particular career field or position? And so I think that that's where this really takes it to that next level, that next step in the exploration process. Now, I will say that, networking it's something that evolves, right? So there's many steps to the networking process. It's not something that's immediate. It takes some time. So I think, it's important to remember to be patient as you go through this networking stage. The reason I say that it evolves is that it also can evolve into introductions from, the initial point of contact that you've had with one individual. They may be able to connect you and facilitate an introduction to maybe some of their colleagues, or perhaps some people that they used to work with at a previous employer, that would be really beneficial for you to connect with and to speak with. So, it's also important to think about, well, how am I going to find these people, right? And who am I going to speak with? So I think, you want to try to remember, who are some of your former colleagues that you've had and who are your current colleagues, right? So thinking about, kind of utilizing your first immediate group of individuals, right? So that could be, advisors, that could be, certainly, former classmates in your program that have now graduated and gone on to other career fields, alumni from not just your graduate institution of Penn, but also perhaps your undergraduate institution. I think a lot of people always, kind of focus more. Students think, oh, well, I'm just, I'm here at Penn, but you also have that alumni community that you can really draw upon from where you went as an undergraduate as well. So I think it's important to think about, alumni not just at your current institution, but at your previous institution or institutions. You also have, individuals that you may have met through various organizations on campus, various clubs that you might be a part of, any committees you've been on. So that's going to be important too, to think about, like, who can I, speak with? Who can I maybe set up a time to, ask them questions? So that leads me to, well, when I find individuals that I want to speak with, well, what would I say to them? What is something that I'm going to ask them? And so we have compiled this guide for graduate students that specifically focuses on informational interviewing. This is, I think, a reference that you can, read through, and it's very comprehensive. Everything from what would I say in an introductory email about myself to the person I'm reaching out to connect with, and set up a time to talk with them, to what are some of the questions that I would want to ask, right? So, questions that focus on their current role, what they see are maybe some challenges in that particular career industry, what are some of the things that they enjoy the most, what are, some words of advice that they, looking back, if they were a PhD student now, what would they perhaps share with you? What would they say? So these questions, we have a lot of questions in there that you might consider asking. We also offer, kind of the do's and don'ts of what networking and informational interviews are and are not, right? It's not asking for a job opportunity. That's not the purpose of these conversations. It's more, again, gathering information and sharing information about yourself. We also even have kind of a sample spreadsheet in this guide to help you kind of keep your notes organized from each of your interviews and conversations you've had, because when you've done a few, they start to blend together. And so this helps you kind of keep things straight in terms of your notes and what you remember. So I do encourage you to check this out. The link is there, and it will also be in the chat box as well. So then the two main places that you would find the individuals that you want to connect with would be LinkedIn and also MyPenn. So MyPenn is the new name for the Penn Alumni Directory. Some of you may have heard in the past QuakerNet. This is now, it's renamed, it's a new platform called MyPenn. You need your Penn key to log in, and you can gain access to the list of alumni. Contact information is typically listed in there with email addresses. And you can also see you can search by career fields and interests and industries, career industries and career fields. And so that is a great way to find people. But LinkedIn is also a very useful tool as well, because we often recommend kind of cross-referencing both databases and platforms. So LinkedIn has a way for you to search for alumni. Again, it's a way to find, names of employers on there. If you already have, a name of a company that you're thinking, oh, I might want to know what it's like to work at this particular employer, you can always search by that. But I think it's always important to kind of keep your search a bit broader, especially when you're at the early stage of the exploration process, because I think it's good to kind of keep your options open and your mind open, right? To just make sure that you're not casting it too narrow in terms of you're not having too narrow of a focus. So LinkedIn and MyPenn are two great platforms to find alumni from Penn. And then, as I mentioned earlier, your undergraduate institution may have a similar online alumni directory as well. And then certainly you can also search, with your undergraduate institution as well through LinkedIn. Okay, so the third area that we're going to talk about in this exploration process is thinking about, how do I professionalize my skill set? How do I gain experience, right? So you might be thinking, well, why is this an important part of the process? And the reason is because it enables you to have more insight and more perspective, right? So gaining experience in a professional way is allowing you to understand more fully what it is that you would hopefully like to pursue. It's something that you can include on your resume. So when you've, kind of thought about, what am I going to put on my resume, this is something that you're able to discuss and able to talk about and include this particular section. You're also able to, talk about it in an interview. So, when you think about what are some of the things that I can, more tangibly discuss, this is going to be a way that you're able to then bring this up in an interview. And you're also then having an opportunity to identify and establish some contacts within your network. And so that's going to be an important piece, especially as you get further along in the process. So the next question is, well, what can I do while I'm at Penn? What can I do while I'm a PhD student to gain this experience, right? To gain this professionalization, so to speak. And the way that you can do that is to be involved in different organizations on campus. So think about groups, clubs, committees that you might be interested in joining. You can also think about, well, maybe I want to apply for a summer internship, or maybe, it may not be for the full summer, but maybe it's a shorter time period. Thinking about an internship that, you might want to just try out and see if this is something that appeals to you. There are also fellowship opportunities as well. And we're going to talk about one in particular in a couple slides that is called our Career Exploration Fellowship. There are also different workshops and competitions that you might want to be a part of as you go through your experience as a graduate student, workshops and competitions that focus on a particular area that really appeals to you and you're really interested in. Perhaps you want to kind of think about, what are some of the volunteer experiences I can have? What are some of the community engagement or outreach programs that I can be a part of? Externships are another helpful way to think about, what it is that you're trying to explore, because it's, not as long as an internship, but it's more kind of, maybe a couple days where you're shadowing a particular individual at their place of employment. You're, maybe attending different meetings and really just trying to kind of get a better sense of what it is that they do. What would be one of their what is their role? What is their position? What does it entail? And then lastly, we also have some job simulations that you might want to take advantage of as well, that really kind of, give you kind of that tangible, concrete opportunity to work on, okay, well, if I'm in this particular role, what would be a project that I may be asked to do? And it kind of allows you to walk through that and simulate what it would be like to be in that position. Okay, so this is just a visual of our career engagement continuum that we have. So as you can see, it kind of it starts on the far left with kind of that initial stages of exploration, right? So, you've heard about it. So, maybe that's through, the online research you've done or talking with individuals that do a particular, who have a particular position within a career industry or career field. You might do some job simulations, the shadowing, externships. Perhaps there's an immersion experience at a particular employer that you hear about and you've applied to do. Again, the community engagement, thinking about, well, what can I do on campus as a graduate student? Thinking about what are some internship opportunities, and then all the way over to the previous work experience. So you can see that it goes from I've heard about it to I've done it. And so I think that this, this really shows you kind of the continuum that this career exploration and career engagement goes along as part of the process. One of the ways that a lot of PhD students have recently had the opportunity to learn about different options for non-faculty roles is through our PhD Career Exploration Fellowship, otherwise known as our CEF. So if you have any friends that have participated in this program and they refer to it as the CEF program, this is what it stands for, the PhD Career Exploration Fellowship. And what it does is it allows you to connect and have kind of this facilitation of networking, of experiencing what they might be doing on a kind of short-term basis. They also have advanced degrees, and so they're able to kind of have that similar common aspect and share that with you. It may not necessarily be the same field that you're pursuing, but they do have that advanced degree. It's an unpaid opportunity where you're able to, be with a host. So the individuals that participate are called hosts, and they are positioned in different administrative offices, whether that's here at Penn, within a higher education administration setting. We also have external hosts as well that have included museums, they've included libraries, pharmaceutical companies, science outreach programs. So we're really kind of growing it, beyond just the higher education administration, but beyond Penn. So that's really exciting. And it really just allows you to have time to think about, well, what are my skill sets? What are the different competencies? What are the values that are important to me? And this really allows you to do it in a more formalized setting of being in the workplace and really kind of, participating in meetings, right? Having conversations with the host. The host often will introduce you to other colleagues and individuals that would like to, have a conversation with you and, share with you about their own experience. So it's gaining that insight. So if you are interested, please keep this in mind. We will have the CEF again next year, and it continues to grow. So I also mentioned the job simulations that can be helpful for you as you start to think about, well, what does it mean to actually, work at a particular organization and have a particular role? And so it's really kind of this exercise of where you're able to kind of go through maybe like a particular case or a particular challenge or a particular project. And these exercises enable you to kind of see what it's like, kind of on that daily experience of a person in a particular field. So I encourage you to, if you're interested in learning that, take a look at the job simulations as well. And they are, organized with, specifically humanities simulations. So you'll see that it's organized with different categories based on what your interests may be. So the fourth step in this process is taking action and making your decisions. So some details to keep in mind as you're at this stage of the process is that applying for positions there's unfortunately not a very set time frame, except for a few industries where they may, have more of kind of a cyclical nature to their hiring process. But in general, it's really going to be dependent on when you're, kind of finishing your program and when you would be kind of ready to, start, working. I mean, that's really going to be kind of what dictates that timeline. Some industries, it's more based on when they have an opportunity that becomes available or when they might add a new position. So again, it's not like the academic market where it's very much kind of the cyclical nature. For the most part, it's going to be really dependent on what field and industry you're applying to. Looking for jobs, there's going to be a lot of different resources out there. I think, it's never too early. We really encourage students to start exploring, even if you're in your first or second year. Again, it's good to just kind of see what's out there. You looking for jobs can be just, going on to, we have various website platforms such as Handshake. You've heard us mention Handshake earlier. Handshake is also not just a way to connect with us in terms of making an appointment, but it's also looking for, internships and job opportunities. So just getting a sense of maybe what's out there. Companies have posted them to Handshake, and you can kind of read through those descriptions. That's, I think, a good place to start. Certainly there are, larger platforms out there as well. I'm sure some of you may have heard of Indeed.com. There's going to be, other websites directly when you go onto the company where you can see their positions listed. But I also think it's important to think about, preparing yourself for that next step. And one of the ways that you need to do that is to kind of think about, do I need a CV for this position or do I need a resume? And so certain fields and industries are going to want, more of kind of a true resume versus a CV, and some kind of want something that's more kind of a hybrid in the middle. So thinking about, how do you tailor and customize these documents? We can assist you with that. We can, have an appointment with you where we're able to discuss, what would you want to include? What should you include? And so definitely feel free to, schedule an appointment with us and we can talk to you more in depth about that. Thinking about, as I mentioned earlier, that there are some career fields and industries where there may be a more cyclical process to their hiring timeline, but in general, there's really not. So, if you are thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to be hopefully finished with my dissertation and graduating in a certain point, maybe thinking about, applying for jobs, prior to, what's the right time, what's the ideal time. And so that's when we can kind of come, you can come to us and we can help you kind of navigate, like, what's a good time to start looking, right? We would say 6 to 9 months is the ideal length. Certainly we have students that come before that. We have students that come maybe a little bit later than that, but ideally 6 to 9 months is going to be, I think, the ideal timeline so that you're not rushed, you're not feeling pressured, you're not feeling stressed. It gives you enough time, to get your application materials together. It allows you to search for positions that are available. Because keep in mind, some industries and fields, again, there's not a set timeline, but even once you submit your application, you may not hear for quite some time whether you made it to the interview stage, whether they want to bring you or to talk with you about your interest in that role, for that phone screen interview. So again, 6 to 9 months is kind of what we would say we would recommend that you allow for that active part. So the first step in the job application is, submitting your resume and cover letter, which are part of your application materials. This is something where we can assist with you. We critique these documents. We can offer our feedback to you. The second step in the job search application process is, when you're invited for that first round interview. So I mentioned like a phone screen. That's typically what's done in the first round interview, though some places and organizations decide that they have a more robust first round interview, right? So it really kind of varies in terms of the structure and the length, but essentially you will have, if you're invited to interview, you'll have a first round interview. The third step is they may bring you back for an additional interview. Some places don't. They might just have the one long interview initially, or some places that have a shorter first round have a longer subsequent round. So again, it just kind of varies from company to company, organization to organization. The fourth step is if you are their preferred candidate and they have selected you to extend an offer to, you would receive the job offer, and then there's the negotiating part. And so we help students with that as well in terms of, what could you negotiate for, and thinking about, what's important to you in terms of negotiations.
So I'm going to end with a couple of other online resources that we did not have time to really talk about. Handshake is where you can schedule appointments, find jobs and internships, connect with other students. Career Explorer is another tool that you can use to explore careers. And this is very much tailored to your input. So it's going to ask you a bunch of questions and it'll come up with some suggested careers for you. Targeted Resume and Big Interview are tools that are more appropriate and useful kind of once you're at the stage of applying for jobs, which we'll talk about in other workshops in our prep camp.